Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. I mentioned this before that the sameness of the days are starting to get to me, especially as winter sets in.
Yeah.
Uh, it's like Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
It really is, and just the kind of the tedium of this lockdown existence. And it's not even locked down in Alberta, is the
No.
truth. Like there's lots you can do, but nonetheless, it's starting to grate on me a little bit. How about you?
Well, it's hockey season without any hockey, you
There's
know,
minor hockey.
I
There's
guess.
minor
Yeah.
hockey. So my daughter's team's starting up, and
Okay, well, that's good.
yeah, so there is that. How are you doing?
By and large, all right. Had a furnace issue this morning that needed quick resolution. Now we're dipping down into the minuses. The furnace kicked in, and it did. One of them did, and the other one didn't. So we had to get that dealt with, and away we go.
I have had a furnace conk out on a 30 below day, and
That's
there
good.
is no more welcome person in your house than the furnace repairman on that particular day. Like he just talk about an essential service.
Hmm.
All right, Bruce. There's some hockey news. We're always about the business and the cult of hockey, not so much about the chit chat. So let's get to the hockey. There's a possible signing that our colleague Kurt Levins, the Cult of Hockey's hockey insider, we've got our own hockey insider
Hmm.
in Kurt. He actually really is good at this rumors thing, very well connected. And he had a rumor about Madison, the Oilers maybe looking at signing Madison Bowie,
Hmm. Oh,
um,
yeah.
Bowie, and so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about scary contracts. How many the Oilers have? Who's got the scariest contracts in the NHL? And if the Oilers can avoid them going forward, we'll talk about Iffy Contracts, and we'll talk a little bit about well, when we talk about the Bowie thing, we'll be talking about your latest post where you're looking at the depth on the Oilers' defense and what it means for this coming season. And we'll talk about finally, we'll end off with a little discussion about the coming season, the Canadian division. So, Bruce, what did you make of the Oilers, of Kurt's notion of the Oilers signing Madison Bowey? I think he's about 25 now. The one thing I liked about it was I think he played, what was it, 47 games last year?
53 games.
53 games last year. And the Oilers, in order to protect themselves coming into the expansion draft, need to have a defenseman who's played. Do you know what off the top of your head, the stipulation is?
Yeah, they need to be under contract. They need to have played either 40 games in the most recent season or 70 games in the previous two seasons, and that will be prorated somewhat due to COVID. So Madison Bowie, for instance, played 53 of 71 games this past year, so that would prorate to somewhere north of 60. So if he were to be signed and played even 10 games this year, he would qualify as long as he was still under contract for next year. So
So they got to sign him to a 2 year deal.
either sign him to a 2 year deal or sign him to a 1 year deal and then sign him to an extension during the season. I think would accomplish the same thing, but he needs to prove he's
What are your
worth the
thoughts?
effort.
What are your thoughts on him, on the idea of signing him?
I'm kind of betwixt and between. I mean, he scored 17 points in 53 games last year, which isn't terrible. He played just under 18 minutes a night for what was a terrible Detroit team, and he was part of the terribleness. That's one of the things that concerns me a little bit. Uh, minus six,
Cam Barker.
minus 16 in that time. Yeah, he got caved by possession numbers, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into this guy before I write a post on him. But first dig suggests that he's not a great defensive player, and that's obviously concerning. And the other thing that's a little bit concerning to me is Ken Holland going back to the well in Detroit over and over again.
The sweet
Uh,
tooth.
yeah, well, sweet tooth for what? I mean, he brought in last year he brought in Thomas Jurcho, old Detroit guy, who played 10 games. He brought in Riley Sheahan, who at least was decent on the penalty kill, but got caved at even strength. I mean, he at least made the team and contributed in some ways.
Good, good,
And then
good on
at
the
the
PK. Excellent.
trade deadline, he went after Mike Green. He went after Andreas Athanasiou. Both those guys bombed for, various reasons, but I mean, both trades went sideways. And, it'd be nice to get somebody who's actually going to pay off, or else maybe start looking and shopping in a different aisle.
Could
So
be
I
could
that
be worse, Bruce. It could
mhm.
be he's coming from a really good team, and would sign a 28-year-old free agent to a huge, massive contract, franchise killing contract, like Shirelli did with Milan Lucic. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Yeah, I agree. The sweet tooth for old players. I mean, God, we saw it with Shirelli. It's just they seem to put this added value on anyone
They know.
they know, and is that as we saw it, I think, with the drafting of the Oilers in the Stu McGregor era, kind of this Western Hockey League, a little bit of a Western Hockey League bias towards players they know. Does it work out? Is that a good idea, or is that And it's funny with Jim Matheson's tweets. He knows the way the mind of the NHL works, and he'll often put, like, the Oilers are interested in so and so player. He's the nephew of former Oiler so and so, or he played for Oilers assistant coach so and so here. So they always have in terms
Yeah.
of how the NHL looks at things. The 200 hockey men. This does seem to be a constant. I wonder if it happens in every
Well, that's
NHL
what I
city.
was going to suggest. There's be some of that. I mean, knowing someone is, a foot in the door in almost any industry to some extent.
Yes.
And so, I mean, some of it's natural, that you're going to want some intel on the guy, and somebody somewhere in the organization might know something about him. But it's becoming to me a little bit concerning in terms of I mean, Detroit was such an awful team last year. Like, they're one of the worst teams we've seen in the last 10 years.
Yes.
And, just way, 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 way out in last place. And I mean, they're rebuilding, obviously, but I'm just not sure that we're seeing much benefit from this inside connection to these guys. Like I say, if one or two of these guys actually paid off, it might be a little bit different. And I probably should give Riley Sheahan sort of half marks for, at least coming in and making the team and making some contributions. And
Well, there's also
any
Mike Smith, right, with the
with
Tippett.
hmm
Is there any other Tippett? Well, where's the Ekman Larson dalliance, which we thankfully avoided the overpay on Ekman Larson. Thank goodness he didn't want to come here, because um, I worry that we might have actually made that overpay to bring him in, like, which isn't just taking on his contract, which is an iffy contract. It would
right.
be giving up a first pick or something like that as well, which I just think, like, Vancouver and Boston were smart just to stay the hell away from that idea.
Yeah, well, Nate's available for a third round draft pick. So all this talk about all this riches that Arizona wanted for Ekman Larson, I think getting rid of the contract was number one on their list of things to do. And he and his agent put paid to that when their deadline came and went, and they said, "All right, we're staying. We're staying." So
Just imagine, Bruce, if we had given up a first pick for Ekman Larson, and then Vancouver gotten Schmidt for a third pick. I mean, there's just no doubt when you look at least when you do just a cursory analysis of the numbers, points, time on ice. The coaches in Vegas, which was a better team than Arizona, trusted Nate Schmidt more than the coaches in Arizona trusted Ekman Larson. And Nate Schmidt did better in terms of his offensive puck moving last 2 years than Ekman Larson did. And it's not that close. Like, there are 30 players separating them in terms of those two things. So anyway, we don't know how far along. I shouldn't
way
catastrophize about something that didn't happen, but I
way
am,
less
Bruce.
money for shorter term too. Like, there was a lot of reasons to prefer
Oh
Schmidt.
yeah, yeah. So here's my Madison Bowey take, Bruce, is
Okay.
what could go wrong with signing one of the worst defensemen on one of the worst hockey teams in the NHL last year? Like, what's not to like about that? On the other hand, as a longtime Oilers fan. I have it deeply embedded in my the narrative of the team that sometimes you bring in these 25-year-old defensemen who have kind of cast about on other teams, haven't been able to break in, played a lot in the AHL, played a lot of hockey, and some of them, when they hit about the age 25, they finally figure it out. They finally figure out how to be NHL defensemen. We saw it way back in the day with Craig Muni. We saw it more recently with Steve Stais, and that's probably the last time we've seen it, right? So we've seen it at least twice. Have we seen it more than that? Jason Smith, would he qualify?
Jason Smith. Oh yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
are there others on that list of defensemen who have figured it out finally about the age 25? They kind of figure, okay, I'm not Bobby Orr, I'm not Paul Coffey, I'm not even Sergei Zubov. I gotta just play a very simple game. And I can maybe get by in the NHL by moving the puck fast, keep my head up, and taking the body. Have we seen it more than that?
Well, I mean, we've seen it internally. Ladislav Smid, I think he was 24 when he finally figured out that he needed to do something about that backdoor play, you know. But oftentimes you see a guy exchange teams before he actually takes that next step, as in the three guys you mentioned, Muni, Smith, and Staios. And I'm sure there's a couple more if we plumb the depth a little further, and we've certainly seen a couple like that go the other way. I think remember sadly Dave Langevin.
Oh well, that was yeah.
Went in the expansion draft just around that age, and went from a strapping young guy with warts in his game to a 4-time Stanley Cup champion, just like that.
The Oilers are more likely to have lost that player this year in Matt Benning, the guy who's suddenly going to become the dependable player. Then they're going to find him in Madison Bowey. I would say that. Now, Madison Bowey was a hell of a prospect at one time. He was a very good junior player. He's big. He can skate. So it's probably just his reading of the game, his understanding of hockey, because he was kind of a toolsy player, right? Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see if he can. He'll either be Cam Barker or, what are the chances? He's 75%, 80% likely to turn out to be Cam Barker, but he's 20% likely maybe to be Steve Staios. So those are the odds. 1 in 5 chance, maybe.
Yeah, odds are against it.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe not even 80%. Maybe not like 80% chance of failure. Maybe it's higher than that. But, I, in principle, this kind of signing I like. The 25-year-old defenseman on a minimum contract. In principle, bring it. If you can sign two of these guys. Who's the guy they just signed in the minors again? What's his name? The defenseman that they lost last year.
Stanton.
Listen, he's a really good hockey player. And is it Stanton or Shannon? Is it Stanton?
Stanton. Ryan Stanton.
Ryan Stanton. Listen, he's a really good hockey player. And was it an NHL? Did he get a 2-way? Because that guy...
he got an AHL contract.
Okay, I don't know if you can change that in mid-season or not. Maybe you can.
If you can.
Yeah. Listen, if the Oilers are desperate, he can play as your third-pairing NHL D-man. I'm convinced of that. Having watched him a lot, not last year, but the year before, he was the best defenseman down there, overall. And that included was he better than Bear or Jones? He was close. He's very, very, very good AHL player. So if the Oilers are in a pinch, they can call on him. But maybe it's going to be this guy, Madison Bowey, and hopefully we won't be haunted by the sweet tooth for former players that many GMs have.
Right.
What's your thought on the overall situation, Bruce, on the blue line?
Well, I'm not happy with the depth situation really at all. With Oscar Klefbom on the shelf, and for planning 2021 purposes, my base assumption is that he's out and he'll miss the whole season. And maybe he comes back late in the season and maybe he doesn't. But if he's out, they brought in Tyson Barrie, who's the one sort of certainly solid enough replacement, although I don't see him as a first pairing defenseman, as we might interpret Clefbaum. Uh, and otherwise, they had a whole bunch of one-way traffic of guys leaving the organization. Most importantly, Matt Benning, that you already mentioned, but a few depth guys down the food chain that they didn't resign. I mean, Brandon Manning, as much as we would never bring him back, but they haven't replaced him with a similar player type within the organization of a guy that could come in and fill in for a few games. Keegan Lowe, they didn't replace him. Uh, what they have is, without Clefbaum, they have four defensemen in the organization who've played 100 games in the NHL. They have six that have played as many as 10 games in the NHL. And then already, once you get past that six, you're down to William Lagesson with 8 games, Evan Bouchard with 7 games. And sure, they're decent, promising prospects. And of course, the absolute wild card of Philip Broberg, who there's no telling whether he might make the team or not this year. It sounds like he's coming on pretty hard. Uh, but there's no sort of experienced depth signed to NHL class contracts at this point. And all Holland did this when he signed this, he went on his little spree there on 9th and 10th. And he signed 4 forwards, 2 goalies, and 1 defenseman. So he replaced one of the several guys that were leaving the organization. So I think definitely there's room for one, if not 2, signings of experienced guys, whether they be, guys at the far end of the career that are hanging on that could be fill-in players, or one of these 25-year-old guys, like you say, of guys that haven't quite caught on yet that might have some game, who might yet still be improving and growing into the rule. I mean, my favorite that I've mentioned a couple times is Slater Kukuk, but there's more guys of that ilk that are out there. There's a lot of
geez, there's a ton of defensemen, aren't there? I'm just looking at the list here, and they go from Andy Green, Sami Vatanen, Travis Hamonic, Ron Hainsey, Zdeno Chara, Mackenzie Weegar. Now, some of these guys are pretty expensive, but some of them might not be as expensive. And Madison Bowey, how does he stack up? I'm not sure. Now, the Oilers have kind of run out of money too, right? Like before, there, as it was on Twitter, his name is Original Puzar. Sent us a note. Pozar sent us a note talking about how the Oilers really can't sign anyone else right now. They have to kind of wait till the season starts, then they can sign someone to dip into the long-term injury replacement money for Clefbaum. It's kind of a weird cap situation, which I'm not really qualified to describe in detail. So they're a little bit hamstrung here, Bruce, unless they were making a trade for a defenseman, maybe move out a forward for a defenseman.
Ultimately, though, when you're projecting the roster, you're only, you're not projecting every guy that you sign to an NHL contract. You're talking about 23 players. Well, right now they got 15 forwards, 6 defensemen, 2 goalies under contract. And if they went out and signed another defenseman, then maybe one of your forwards that's on your list doesn't make your team, because you're not going to have a 25 or 26 man roster. You're going to have a 23-man roster. So maybe Patrick Russell doesn't make a team, and instead you have some forward in there.
So to be cap compliant, you send them to the minors to
potentially
get their cap off. So you send, let's say you send Chase onto the minors, right? Like to get $2 million off your books.
Now, you'd have to waive him. You'd have to waive.
That's right.
Him. The only guys you don't have to waive are the ones on entry level contracts. So Kyler Yamamoto, for instance, they could paper transact him down for a day, just to become compliant, and then call him right back up. But they don't actually have a lot of guys on entry-level contracts right now that are in the NHL.
Yeah, so it would have to be Yamamoto. But they could send down Jujhar Khaira to the minors, for instance, and for a day or two. And then when they
cleared waivers, they could,
Yeah, when they start access. Yeah, you're taking the risk of losing them on waivers. But I think they can do that with a couple players, obviously. Honestly, like, I don't think anyone's taking Jujhar Khaira on waivers. Like, sorry. It's not happening at this point.
The simple thing, you could put James Neal on waivers and no one would touch the guy with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah,
but then you've cleared too much cap space that when you try and put Clefbaum on LTIR, there's, it's such a complicated thing, as our lawyer friend, Original Pozar, said to us. And I've yet to hear a fully cogent explanation of long-term injury reserve that held together in my tiny brain from start to finish. There's sort of two ways of dealing with it: putting the guy on after the season starts or before the season starts. And if the guy's going to miss the whole year, it's simple enough. But if there's any chance he's going to come back during the year, you can have headaches galore.
Bruce, I got to go in about 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes here. So let's just quickly, I'll
Sure.
just quickly run through some of the stuff about scary and iffy contracts.
Okay.
Um, there's a lot of, it's funny because in oil country, there's a lot of people who go on and on and on about Jason's contract or about Jujhar Khaira's contract or even Mike Smith this year or Chris Russell being the most obvious example. They're just on and on and on. And listen, I think there's just, you can make a case that all of these players are overpaid a bit
Hmm.
and maybe even as much as $1 million, per year for some of them, like maybe for Russell at this point. Maybe,
Cap it. Yeah.
yeah, in terms of their cap hit, right? Not in terms of
Hmm.
their take home pay. You could, Smith, maybe even, or 500,000. But when you look at the deals that really kill a team, and that's what I've been looking at, it's not even close to that. When
No.
you look at the deals that kill a team, players that are overpaid $5 million a year.
For the
Those are the
next six
contracts for
years.
the next
Yeah.
6 years. So the Milan Lucic contract, right? He's overpaid. He
Yep.
almost was from day one. The first season, you could say he came close to covering it. Since then, he has been overpaid five. He's been a replacement level player, overpaid $5 million a year. So, and we're still living with that because you might, James Neal might be a $2 million a year player now. Maybe. I don't know what he like
Mm.
pre-COVID. Probably you could
Yeah.
argue maybe $2 million a year. He's kind of, but we're still living with the Lucic contract. So I'll just go through the worst ones. Just think if we were saddled with these contracts, Bruce. Jeff Skinner. He's got 7 more years at a contract that pays
I
him 9 million per. Sergei Bobrovsky, 6 more years at a contract that pays him $10 million. Brent Seabrook, 4 more years at a contract that pays him 6.8 million. Justin Falk, 7 more years at a contract that pays him 6.5 million. He's just starting that. And that Falk contract, frankly, is why they lost Alex Pietrangelo.
Never made sense,
I
did it?
don't know what Armstrong was thinking the day he made that deal and then the day they signed that contract a year ahead of time. There's the Louis Eriksson. Then we run into the Louis Eriksson, Milan Lucic class of contract. They're a little older. Then there's a couple that have started to haunt their teams. PK Subban, $9 million a year, and he's got 2 more years on that, Bruce. And he is not the player that he was. And the same can be said. Well, there's Martin Jones. He's got 4 more years on a deal that pays him 5.7 million. There's Kessler, 2 more years on a deal that pays him 6.8 million. There is who else has fallen off the turn-up truck?
A guy like Kessler, at least he can be buried on LTIR. I think he's done.
Franz Franz Nielsen. Here's another Ken Holland. Ken Holland signed a few Whopper contracts in Detroit. He's got 4 more years on a deal that pays him 5.2 million, and he's like a fourth line. He's a replacement level NHL player right now. So there's all of these contracts. And then there's the iffy contracts. This is what I'm going to be doing next. And these are the players that are kind of like, they're still good players in the NHL. They're just old and overpaid, generally speaking. Not always old. Some of them are younger and have iffy contracts. But top of the list there's the San Jose Three: Erik Karlsson, Brent Burns, and Marc-Edouard Vlasic. San Jose, like so they're probably thinking, oh, Karlsson and Burns are going to rebound. They had off years last year, and Vlasic is still a steady player. But these, they all, Bruce, Vlasic's paid 7 million a year, Karlsson 11.5 million, and Burns 8 million a year, and they've all got many multiple years left on their deals. So,
26 million.
and there are some younger players: Shane Gostisbehere, Vincent Trocheck, Mike Matheson, Alex DeBrincat, Clayton Keller, uh, who all signed big deals. And who knows how that's going to work out for the teams that sign them. So that's what I'm
Josh
digging in.
Anderson.
Josh Anderson. So the Oilers have to um, miss out on that kind of contract going forward. Avoid it at all costs, I think. And that, which is why I'm so fundamentally glad, and I could be completely wrong about this. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I am so glad they missed out on the Jacob Markstrom deal, which was rumored to be 7 years at 5 million plus. Apparently, heard Darren Dreger talk about this, 5 million plus for Jacob Markstrom. Like, you can have him, Calgary, for 6 years, $6 million. Maybe he's going to be, for even 4 or 5 of those years, your number one goalie, just who he was this last year, a really good goalie in the NHL. No denying it.
Then he'd be worth it if he keeps that up for several years.
Sure would be, but maybe not. Maybe not.
You could say the same thing about Leonard. I mean, he signed 5 years, 5 million in Vegas, and probably he covers the bet. But does he cover it 3, 4, 5 years down the line?
He's a little younger. Like, I honestly, he's a couple of years younger, isn't he, than Markstrom?
Yeah, I think so.
And it's the cap hit is 1 year less on the term, I should say, and the cap hit is $1 million less. I think the Leonard contract was actually, like, especially for a free agent, that was a very team-friendly deal, I thought. And I like the Leonard deal. And I just it's just kind of in the upper end of what you want to pay for a player and still get good value out of him. So I think that one's defensible, but I don't know. I'm glad they didn't get Markstrom. So
yeah, well, Leonard's 29.
Yeah.
And Markstrom is 30, but almost 31, so almost 2 years between them. Anyway, compare any of those guys to the 4 Oiler contracts that you named earlier. Every single one of those Oiler contracts expires in 2021. It's only got 1 year to run. And other than the Russell cap hit, the other ones are all, $2 million and less, basically. Like they're look, those guys are well-paid veterans, I guess, or decently paid veterans. But I'm not sure you can make a case that any of them are truly horrible contract. Certainly nothing close to any of the other ones you've named in terms of the huge risk taken with cap hit and term. Not to mention some of the various clauses and bonuses that protect some of those contracts. I mean, the one contract they always have that is not good is the James Neal contract. And to me, that's essentially about 2/3 of that I would write off to dead cap space from the Lucic disaster.
Yeah. So we're in a future podcast, maybe even later this week, we'll dig into the Oilers' kind of danger in terms of entering into these contracts in the near future, which is fairly minimal actually. But they have a lot of cap room opening up next year, and they have the Ryan Nugent-Hopkins deal to sign. So we'll talk about RNH's contract in that context and what makes sense for the Oilers and for the Oilers. The player will be looking out for his own own interest. All right, Bruce, I got to head on out. So thanks for talking today.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.